Welcome to another video coverage of This Week on Rails. I'm Dave Kimura, and this week we have Wojciech giving us the updates. So let's dive right in. The first item, support checked as a keyword argument in checkbox tag and radio button tag, and this one is a nice quality of life improvement where now we can pass in the keyword argument checked false and get the expected functionality. And before, it had to be passed in as a positional argument, meaning that you would have to do something like a checkbox, and then the name, and then the value that you wanted to set, and then whether or not it was checked. But passing it in as a keyword argument, now you have the best of both worlds. And the next one is to allow the active record adapter execute to retry on connection related exceptions. And this one basically means that if you have some kind of transaction that your Rails application is trying to execute on the database, and for whatever reason there is some kind of interruption with the database connection, then now you can do a retry. But you do want to use caution when using this, because if there is some kind of database trigger that happens once a transaction is completed, then you could, when you retry, have a situation where it then re-triggers that database action. So you want to use caution. You want to make sure that your transactions that you are doing are idempotent if you are using the allow retry. And the next one is to expose the request parameter filter, and this feature is useful if you want to filter some hashes based on the same parameter filter as the request. So it is pretty cool that we are getting some more access to that private API. However, I don't know exactly when I would be able to use something like this or in what situations it would be helpful. And if we look at the example, we have the request coming into the controller action. We then call parameter filter on there, and then filter, passing in some arguments. And the return that we get is the secret with the filtered text, and then we got our other argument. So perhaps you have some kind of regression testing that you're wanting to make sure that certain attributes are getting filtered. So perhaps in a test suite, this could be very useful. And then we have the adds validate to foreign key and check constraints in the database schema file. And I think this one's very important, especially in situations where you just do a DB setup on a new provisioning of your application. And the reason why this one's important, because if you do a Rails DB migrate, then it's going to have a different functionality than the DB setup, which is just loading the schema data. And one thing that I've done in the past to handle these kind of situations where there is a major update to the schema and I want to future-proof my application for any new developers or anyone who may run the DB setup is that on my local environment, I'll just host the entire database and then I will recreate it running Rails DB migrate. And once I do that, I'll see that there's a lot of different changes in the schema. And so from there, I can then verify on a case-by-case basis with my different environments. If I have a development environment, staging environment, and maybe a production environment, I can check and make sure that the schema matches over there as what the new schema is. And if it does not match, then I might have to have some additional migration down the road to fix the inconsistencies, just so we have some data integrity, if in particular it would potentially cause some problems down the road. And the next one is fix memory store to preserve entries TTL when incrementing or decrementing. And essentially what this means is when you have a value that's stored up in Redis or Memcached and you are incrementing its value, so if it's a numerical value, you increment it from 1 to 2 using the built-in functions, then you don't want to reset the expiration of that particular key. And it's important to note, and if we look at the example or the pull request in the story in the actual issue, when we call the increment or the decrement, then it's going to increase its value by 1 in this case, but it would also reset the TTL or the time to live. So for this fix, it's going to keep the previous value for the expires in. And I'm a little bit mixed on this because I think in some situations, if we are updating that key, then we would want to reset that expires in, but I can see in other situations where you still want to end it or have it go stale after a certain amount of time, regardless of any updates that it might have gotten from incrementing or decrementing its value. So that's all of the updates for this video coverage of This Week in Rails, and again, thank you to all the different contributors who have helped make Rails a better framework. I really appreciate all the first-time contributors as well as all of the veterans who have been around for some time. And if you would like to receive your own copy of the email newsletter, you can go to world.hey.com/this.week.in.rails. Well, that's all for this episode. Thanks for watching.